Hello and welcome to Nerd Night, actually Nerd Night and the Dionysium. You are here, virtually here. We are in Austin, Texas, and this is Nerd Night Austin. You may be anywhere in the world, or at any one of the 85 different Nerd Nights across the world. But tonight, as I said, is super special because it's not just Nerd Night, it's Nerd Night plus Dionysium, our sister nerdy edutainment show. And we're all virtual now, and so we're getting together to do it together. We're going to have an amazing show with speakers and Q&A and Dionysium-style debate and the interstitial music of Graham Reynolds. So they'll be just like being there. You should be here. This is what we usually say from the stage, us at the North Door and Dionysium at the Alamo Drafthouse Theater. But even virtually, we do get most of our talks from the audience. So I want to say go to austin.nerdnight.com and tell us about that thing that you know more about than everybody else. Because we want you to come on Zoom and tell everybody in the world about it. And thank you to all the volunteers, Amy and Aaron, Bianca and Jackie, and of course Jacob, who does all the AVs, amazing, and LB and Buzz and Rowan and Graham and William. Everybody came together to put this whole thing together. Thank you so much to our speakers, Kathleen and Kevin. I just am very excited about tonight. It's going to be a lot of fun, and thank you nerds for tuning in. I think we've got a lot of good stuff for you. After the talks, there's a Q&A, and you do need a Twitch account to ask questions. You don't need one to see the comments, just to type one. And after the debate, there will be a vote, and you do not need a Twitch account in order to vote. There will be a link in the comments that you can click on and register your vote for or against our resolution. And yeah, that's it tonight. We've got three great sections. Dr. Kathleen Higgins is going to talk about the plague, and Kevin Garcia is going to talk about a really bad day in the life of the Aztecs, and then a Dionysium debate featuring Nerd Night bosses, Amy Cavender and myself, Mickey Delp.
Rowan Holiday.
Hello, my beloved audience. You know that I miss you. I miss you terribly. I haven't seen you since February, and it's terrible. But I live in hope that we will see each other in person, and in the meantime, we gather here through the beauty of cyberspace to celebrate one another. So the debate resolution is pretty near and dear to our hearts tonight. It's pretty close, and we may get a little emotional about it. It's all right to be a little emotional. As Dr. Higgins pointed out, solidarity and dealing with our feelings together is healthy and good. So if you feel a need to, hug someone, drink wine, whatever you need to do, you do that. Self-care is important. Our affirmative debater is many things. She's a platelet program manager at We Are Blood, a nerd boss at Nerd Night Austin, a storyteller, a stalwart friend. She is not, however, a vampire, so stow it with the jokes already. We're delighted to welcome Amy Cavender. Our opposing debater is an engineer, a programmer, a maker, a teacher, an artist, and a musician. He's the chief inventor at Delptronics, board president and instructor at Data Geek Academy, and co-boss of Nerd Night Austin. It's possible they know one another. I'm sure there's no fix-in. We're delighted to welcome Mr. Mickey Delp.
Thank you.
So what brings these esteemed persons to our virtual Thunderdome? No less weighty a topic than this. Resolved. The world is a different place now. Our debate format is the same. You will find that reassuring and comforting. We'll have 3-minute opening statements, beginning with Ms. Cavender and moving on to Mr. Delp. 3-minute rebuttals in the same order. Then we will allow you to take to questions. Now, Ms. Cavender and Mr. Delp will have one question for one another, and then we'll take questions from the audience. In order to ask a question, you do need a Twitch account, so if you're burning to ask questions of the debaters, you want to go register now. So it'll also reassure you to know that the rules are the same. No hitting below the belts, no personal attacks. Address all of your questions to me, your moderatrix, and obey your time limits. Don't think that just because I cannot lurk near the stage at you, that I cannot enforce the time limits. You will hear a delightful ping. When your time is up, please finish your thought and end. Thank you. With that, Ms. Cavender.
Everything is changing constantly. It has been ever thus. Clouds in the sky, the patterns that they move through, radioactive elements decaying, grains of sand arranged and rearranged on the beach, moved by the ever-changing tides, the cells dividing in our bodies. But all that's relatively abstract in general. Let's look at something that's a bit more easily understood, a unit of time that we can all grasp and really work with for the purposes of this conversation. A year, one circuit around the sun. What was your life like last year at this time? Some factors were probably similar. Our government is made up of mostly the same people. Our laws, by and large, work similarly. But think about these things. When was the last time you saw someone play an instrument for a crowd that you were a part of? When was the last time you got a hug from someone you didn't live with? How do you feel about going to a store, a movie theater, or a restaurant right now versus a year ago? How do you feel about telling someone you went to a store or a restaurant, if you have, which you may not have? I don't know your business. How many people do you know that had jobs last year that don't have them now and might not be able to go back to even the same type of job in a year or two? If your answers are like mine, then those answers will indicate that a huge shift has happened in our culture and our way of life in the space of a few months, and there might not be a return to what was, or even to something similar to what was for quite some time. So, of course, it isn't all bad. Another change that's happened recently in the world is that for the first time, a woman who's not only African American, but also Asian American is on the VP slot for a major political party. It's a positive change that's happened. But nonetheless, even good change is still change. And the world has changed, and it will bring us along with it, whether we like it or not. And I think I brought it in about 10 seconds early.
In fact, you did. We'll continue with an opening statement from Mr. Delp.
Thank you, Madam Moderatrix. It's such a difficult word to pronounce. The world is not a different place, sadly. The world changes very slowly, and it does not change in response to catastrophic events, even though it seems as though it should at the time. The Black Death, the deadliest plague in human history, changed very little. Due to sharp decreases in population, there was short-term improvements, but they were quickly lost. Worker pay increased, but it was erased by rampant inflation. The manor system, which was already in decline, collapsed, But as population inevitably rose again, lower classes were once again subjected to oppression and famine. In Eastern Europe, the serfdom was implemented, and the lower classes, they never even saw temporary improvement. During the Black Death, it seemed like everyone was going to change, and it didn't. The Spanish flu pandemic, arguably the closest parallel to our current situation, that changed nothing. Even our ability to deal with the next pandemic. Same calls to reopen, the same anti-mask demonstrators. More recently, people thought that when September 11 attacks happened, everything will be different. It changed nothing, just slower airport security procedures. What else is different? The decline of brick and mortar retail, that was happening since '97. Online learning's been around a couple decades. Remote workers have been around for even more decades. Outsourcing, protests, social movements. Black Lives Matter movement started in 2013. And even that is just the most recent chapter in a struggle that's lasted 150 years. So the world is not a different place. It takes more than 6 months to change the world. Thank you.
Both of you are doing very well with your time limits, and I appreciate that. So here we have the perspective of the world is different from a year ago versus the perspective of, and yet it doesn't change on the glacial sense. I, for one, am anxious to see the rebuttals. We'll begin with Ms. Cavender.
My esteemed counterpart has made many fine points. However, I would argue that the world is made up of people. And when we talk about systemic change, it's true that that takes time to roll through systems. But I think it's undeniable that the experiences that most individuals have now are just not the same as they were. I mean, the fact that we're doing this in this way tonight is a change. And so I think that from the individual perspective, it's very difficult to make the case that nothing has changed. Although in a cathedral building perspective, I can concede that point. But really, when we're talking about the world, we're talking about the experience of the world that we have through our sensoriums and our social networks. And it's very apparent that those things have been radically altered. And one of the things that's also going to bear on this issue, I think, is the fact that people are learning fear, learning different modes of interacting with people that are radically different than anything in the past, really in our whole time as a species. And I don't think that the fact that we don't have systemic change in certain political and legal structures is going to negate the fact that we are going to have substantial lingering interpersonal change. I cede the rest of my time.
Thank you, Ms. Cavender. Mr. Delp?
Thank you, and thank you, Ms. Cavender. In your talk, Amy, in your opening statement, you talked about the present. You said the world is a different place now, and talked about how last year was so different than this year, and rightly so, absolutely accurate. But next year, is that going to be different? Or is that going to be just like 2019? Or maybe not next year. How about 2023? I suspect that that is going to be very much like 2019. The world is only different at this moment. It's not really a different place. It's the same world. And I don't think that lasting change happens that quickly. And most of the changes that we're experiencing now will not last. Thanks.
The moderatrix would like to take a moment to remind Mr. Delp to direct his comments to me and not to his opponent.
Indeed.
The moderatrix would also like to take a moment to remind the affirmative debater not to smirk because we can all see her.
I'm just so happy to be here.
I'm simply saying we do not smirk when others are corrected. We have reached the time when we speak to one another a little more clearly. So please, in the audience, please submit your questions in the chat, and we will begin with a question from Mr. Delp to Ms. Cavender, and Ms. Cavender will have 1 minute to respond.
Ms. Cavender, my question for Ms. Cavender is, what changes do you think will be lasting? When we look back 3 years from now, how will the world be a different place?
My response to Mr. Delp is as follows. I think that there is going to be enduring psychological damage to children and adolescents who are developing their social skills and ideas of how to interact with people, including hugging, appropriate touch, all that kind of stuff. I also think that there are going to be really persistent economic damages that are going to be felt by people in the hospitality sector, in live entertainment, and in anything that had a business model that involved congregating around people because of the hits to their revenue that are going on for a really to be determined amount of time. I also think that there will be a positive change in that we will probably have a much clearer understanding about the development processes of medical treatment for viruses that are probably going to continue to emerge over time, with convalescent plasma going from something that's kind of, to being a...
Ms. Cavender, I do remind you of your time.
Thank you. I believe that the technological advances in medical treatment will be a positive change.
Thank you. And now, do you have a question for Mr. Delp?
Yes. What do you think is going to go back to normal after this?
What do I...
Oh,
I
didn't. Madam Moderatrix, would you please...
do you wish to redirect?
Yes.
You may clarify your question, but quickly.
What does Mr. Delp think will not change? There we go.
Well, given that my main point is that the world is not really a different place, I think that nothing will change in the broadest sense. Minor changes happen, and they happen very slowly. Large changes take forever. So what will change? Our pandemic preparedness? Well, past pandemics would not indicate that that'll change. So no, I don't think so. Our technology? No, this pandemic isn't going to change that because this is old technology. We've all been doing this for a long time. It's just a few more people are doing it. They're going to go back to not doing it. Work from home. Bosses never did like that. As soon as they can have you back, you're back. None of the changes are going to be permanent.
Two well-asked questions, and now we will open it up to the audience. I see that some of you have already been submitting your questions, and for those of you who have not, may I remind you, as ever, that what we are looking for are questions. We are not looking for manifestos. We are not looking for, pardon me, I'm having a small technical issue getting to the questions. We are not looking for manifestos. We are not looking for dissertations, polemics, or screeds. We are merely looking for questions. And those questions must be directed to one debater or the other. They cannot be directed to both, and there are no follow-up questions. You always want to ask follow-up questions, and you can't have them. And so with that, I will open up to a question for our affirmative debater. Ooh. What is normal and who defines it? You have 1 minute to answer.
I think that there is ample documentation that's typically used in different fields to define milestones that people hit in human development and in the range of possibilities of human relationships. My personal perspective tends to skew more towards, American pediatric physicians and things like the American Psychological Association, American Medical Association, psychiatric associations, etc. And that's my bias. But I also think we all have our own innate sense of how people act and how people are. And I think we're going to notice differences in those personal criteria over time, except for perhaps people who are already incredibly introverted, and in which case any changes that they notice will probably be viewed in a very positive light.
Thank you, Ms. Cavender. I now have a question for our opposing debater. I like this part where I get to choose the questions before I hear them. It's kind of exciting, and I don't know if I can keep it, but I maybe want to. In a deterministic universe, is change actually possible? You have 1 minute to address that particular question.
That's the one you picked. Thank you, moderators. Yes, change is possible in a deterministic universe. I don't think that was really part of either of our theses, but change does happen. And change happens on a broad scale and an individual level. Individual changes, of course, are constant. I am different. I don't know if I'm a whole new me, just as the world is not a whole new place. But yes, even in a deterministic universe, change happens because most changes, I'll say, from the perspective of the viewer. So that is my answer.
Well answered. Thank you very much. I believe we have time for one more round of questions. We are absent our Madam Timekeeper this evening, so I am unsupervised and therefore running rogue. You're just going to have to live with it. Has Ms. Cavender, has this pandemic brought us into the future? For decades, sci-fi promised us we'd all be making video calls, and even when the tech was there, nobody used it. But now, we all do. Are we living in the future yet?
We're always living in the future. With that said, I do think that it's the video call thing. It was foretold, and we're finally using it to a greater advantage than we were prior. We still don't have the food pellets, and well, actually, I guess we sort of have that too. No flying cars though, and I'm still very sour about that. But yes, I do believe that this has advanced certain telecommunication technologies, and that may be a small silver lining of what is otherwise a somewhat dark period of time.
Excellent answer, thank you. Question for our opposing debater. I'll make it perhaps a little less complex than the last one, though that was fun. Is it that change takes a long time to happen, or is it that it takes a long time for us to recognize the trends?
Both of these things are true. We think things are changing when they're not, and we miss changes that that are indeed happening. Um, there weren't even any reporters at Kitty Hawk when the first airplane flew, and that was a big one. That was a massive change. That's an inflection point. There's things that get missed. Um, Computers. There were a lot of people that were like, "Yeah, this is going to be big," and I don't know why. We'll figure out some use for them, but it's going to be big. And most people were like, "Get those toys off the desk and log on to the mainframe." But yep, small computers turned out to completely change everything, and a lot of people missed that. We do miss things constantly. It's usually with hindsight that we discover change happened.
That was right at a minute. I'm very impressed. Did you practice that? I'm going to take a look at the questions. We do have quite a lot of them, or quite a few of them. And I think I'm going to allow one more question for each debater. Again, I'm unsupervised. It's amazing. For our affirmative debater, are we talking about economic changes, societal changes? Just besides just everything is changing, you went a little bit in, I'm going to extrapolate a little on the question. You went a little bit into some of the psychological changes and the economic, but what social changes do you see?
Oh gosh. One of the ones that I think that's actually kind of an interesting side effect of the extensive number of people that are unemployed or underemployed is that more people had time to get involved in protests against police violence towards people of color. And I think that a lot of this, and I don't think that was solely people who were not working or solely people who were unemployed, but I think that for a lot of people, they had more ability to go and engage because they did not have something that was exhausting them otherwise. And then that also mobilized people who were still working, were still doing what they had been doing in the before time. I also think that we're going to see a lot of political engagement because people are going to remember what happened to their friends and what happened to their families. And they are going to understand that the only way to possibly avoid something similar happening to the same extent is to become more engaged in their government at every level. I don't think that there's going to be the same amount of apathy around politics at any level that there was prior to this.
A little over time, but still a good answer. And our final question is for Mr. Delp. Did not World War II completely change the lives of all that lived through it?
Yes. But was the world different afterwards? Those individuals were different. They had gone through an experience. Many did not live through it, just as many are not living through this pandemic. And the people that did get through it were affected. But did the world change because of that? You know what they called it? They called it the war to end all wars. It didn't. In fact, there's been no time period since then that the world has not been at war. It did not have the effects that people thought it would. But to directly answer your question, yes, the individuals, they were affected.
Thank you. And though I know that there are more questions, we are going to bring the audience question and answer to an end. I urge you all to discuss these amongst yourself in the chat, find Facebook groups, find many fine online outlets for discussing these questions because there are an awful lot of them. However, it is time for us to move on to our closing arguments, and we will begin with Mr. Delp. You have 3 minutes.
3? I thought it was 2.
Have I caught you unawares?
You have, but I can do 3.
Excellent.
3 is easier. Thank you, Madam Moderatrix. The world is not a different place now. Would that it were a different place. it feels like it should be a different place. But that's always the perspective of the moment. And my video.
Oh, there he is again.
Hi.
We
Sorry about
briefly
that.
lost Mr. Delp. I'll add 10 seconds to your time.
Appreciate that, Madam Matron, but never going to be able to say that. So, my stream of thought. Let's look again at the past and what did or did not change. Right now, we're suffering huge economic effects. That's not a change. Huge economic effects happen all the time. What about the financial crisis of 2008? It was huge, and everything was going to be different after that. And then Dodd-Frank, and then the new administration dismantles the Dodd-Frank bill, and everything's pretty much the same. And the stock market came back, and the banks are still there, and nothing is different. And, well, clearly, again, just to think of the last big pandemic we had in America, after the flu, every restaurant and live music venue and theater, they were all closed, and many of them closed for good. I personally can't name one of those restaurants that shut down. Well, that's because time does that, and over time, things don't change. They would, I think, if we had better memories. But again, we're doing the same thing now that happened then, and making the same mistakes. A couple of good moves maybe, but mostly things don't change. The big one example I was going to give in my closing remarks is World War II, and I'm glad the questioner gave me the opportunity to talk about that. But I feel I have to mention another one, the American Civil War. One would think that such an immense change as the freeing of the slaves would have worked. But the last 150 years proves that things don't change in an instant. And all of us still have a lot of work to do to make that change happen. So the world, unfortunately, is not an entirely new place. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Delp. And for the final closing remarks, Ms. Cavender.
Thank you. So I think that there's a fine distinction here. And I think if I were to try to articulate it, what I would say is that human nature may change slowly, but the world that humans experience can change rapidly and at monumental scale. We still react in our, primate brain ways and sometimes our lizard brain ways, but the things that we're reacting to are really unprecedented in human history right now. We have never had a plague that could act so quickly, spread so far, affect so many in so many different ways. This is new, and a lot of it is because of the ubiquity of air travel, global commerce, meaning that somebody could wake up on one side of the planet, fly for 20 hours, be on the other side of the planet, and just breathe on everybody along the way. And so I think that the crux of our debate is, if we were debating, has human nature changed because of the coronavirus and everything else, then I would just give up and concede the point, because people are still peopling at a troubling rate. But the world that we're in, the shape of it is different. The contours of it are different. There are people that are no longer in it that should have been. And that's the change. There are businesses that should have been able to operate that are not able to operate because of decisions made by people in systems that were not good, were not timely, or were not enforced in a meaningful way. So people are still trying to use the same techniques, approaches, behavior patterns to deal with something that we've never dealt with before as a species. And we have some tools that are wonderful and powerful that will help us. And we have some tendencies that are perhaps less wonderful and may not help us as much. But we also have infinite flexibility, infinite possibility to take what's been torn down and build something better. And if there is a world that's changed, I hope that it has given us something that we can work with to make something better for the future.
Thank you, Ms. Cavender. You should see, beloved audience, in the chat now, a Google poll link. Ordinarily, we have a delightful interlude in which you raise your hands and our maestro counts the hands and delivers the results to me, but we are excitingly working with technology today, so you'll be able to register and vote via Google Chat. So click that link now. We're going to take a brief interlude to allow you some time to vote, and we'll be back shortly to let you know if the resolution has carried or failed. Thank you. And we're back. Also, ordinarily, this is the point in time where we'd be getting some delightfully convoluted directions how to find a local bar where we could all drink together. So I'm going to ask you all, alcoholically or not, whatever makes you happy, to raise a beverage tonight in honor of Dionysus to celebrate after the show. And before we announce the results, I want to take a moment and I want to profoundly thank both of our debaters and Nerd Nite for making this possible. The Dionysium is a beautiful thing and I adore doing it, and the chance to step back into my moderatorial shoes, such as they are. They're not bunny slippers, I promise, they're not bunny slippers. My moderatorial shoes has been a joy. And with that, I would like to announce that you may all breathe a sigh of relief. The world is much as it was. The resolution has failed to carry. If you want the world to change, you're going to have to do it yourselves. Thank you and good night.